This event is hosted by Crossroads and Truth and Transformation Nordic.
So also very welcome from my side. My name is Ulrich Schneeweiss. I'm from Germany. And Truth and Transformation was created 3.5 years ago. And our creed, our goal is to restore education with Christian values. That means that we want to create an education system in a new global ecosystem that will bring the truth of the Bible back to education and through education to all of society. So with that, I would like to introduce then the special guests for tonight. We have David Gress here. He is a historian. He has written a wonderful book. This one here, From Plato to NATO. This brings so much truth of history alive, not just Europe, but mainly Europe, America. So absolutely a must read. Our second welcome guest here is Vishal Mangalwadi. He was born in India 4 years prior to David Gress, and he experienced the social issues in his own country, and he tried to help resolve some of that by really hands-on working with the needy, with the social underprivileged, with young folks also. And then he realized that what he and his lovely wife Ruth could do in India just with their hands was a good token, but it wasn't a breakthrough. It wouldn't change the nation. So he decided to also then get into authorship. He wrote 26 books by now. One very recommendable here. It's a bestseller, The Book That Made Your World. A second one then is the book that changed everything. So this is the English version of that book. And we're very privileged to have that book now in 3 languages here. It's Finnish, Swedish, and the premiere tonight here, the Danish version of that book. So it's a Danish translation. So with that, we'll get to the program. Tonight we're trying to do 3 parts. The first part talks about Denmark's history, and we will interview these 2 dear guests a little bit about that, about the past. What has the past done to Denmark? How did it shape Denmark? What are the roots of Denmark? What maybe has the Bible done for Denmark? So that'll be a very interesting discussion of the past. We then will go into looking at the present situation. What is challenging Denmark today? What is left of the Christian roots? How has it transformed today? What is challenging for the youth? And how do the older generations react to that? So we'll talk about that in detail with both. And then finally, we will try a little bit of hope. So we're looking at the future of Denmark, and we're asking them to look into the crystal ball and see how can maybe the society take a more proactive approach to changing not just Denmark, but bless the own nation and maybe even beyond all of Europe. And we'll take some ideas, hopefully, out of the pocket from David and from Vishal. So we'll be interested to see what they come up with in terms of hope speech for tonight. So that's the program for tonight. I may now introduce Cedric Placentino to you. He's quite international. He's also a great historian and very interested also in the Christian roots of Europe. He is doing podcasts. He calls it European Journey, and he describes how individual cities or people have transformed Europe. Very interesting. You can have it on Substack or also on other channels. He can talk about that a bit. So here we go.
Thank you, Ulrich. So it's a great privilege really to have you too, and thank you again for coming, David and Vishal. The prophet Jeremiah, when he received this calling from God, God told him, I've set you up to demolish and to rebuild, or to uproot and to plant. And when I read both books, so From Plato to NATO, and of course the book that made your world, this book changed everything, so more than 2 books, realized that we have here basically the 2 sides of that call present with us. There's been the book From Plato to NATO, which I highly recommend if you can get a copy of that. Dr. David Gress really demolishes, uproots, if as it were, the false narratives that are being told about the origins of the West, and it's a really in-depth work, while Vishal Mangalwadi also does that, but also shows, and actually David also shows how Christianity has influenced the making of the West, what we call the West today. So, if I dare saying, we have here basically Demolition Man and Bob the Builder. But obviously, the person who has done the demolition has also done the building, as well as the person who is more focused on the building has also demolished. So tonight it's a privilege to hear them talking, dialogue together. And I would like to start with the first question, which would be very, very general, which, before we get into the more specifics of Denmark. And that's a sentence that I find probably summarizes the best what we are after tonight. And this sentence is the following: the roots of every civilization are ultimately religious. The roots of every civilization are ultimately religious. I would like to ask you to comment on that, and maybe start with David.
Okay. Yes, well, that wasn't clear to me. You called me a demolition man, because what I did in that book was I took the standard story that was told in universities and schools about Western civilization, that it began with the ancient Greeks, evolved through the Romans, Middle Ages kind of faded out of the picture, then comes the Renaissance, the Reformation, and things start to look up. I tried to undermine that by saying, I'll just start one thing here, the Middle Ages were much, much more important than in that story. But what I don't think I quite realized at that time, doing the demolition job, was that after the demolition, what was left turns out to be what Cedric just said, namely the truth that all civilizations, including the Western, are at bottom religious. And of course, if you go out and take a poll of leading intellectuals in the West, 95% would be very offended and would be angry. Of course not. This is a rational civilization. Well, I think if you look at around the world today, the word rational may not be quite adequate, but most academic scholars, most established scholars, most media people, intellectuals, politicians, would take very strong exception to the claim that Western civilization is basically religious. Islamic civilization, clearly. Hindu civilization, clearly. Western, not so much. What is very interesting in the very recent years, just since 2020, is that some of the most prominent intellectuals in the Western world have begun to change their mind. I'll just give you two names. One is Richard Dawkins. You may have heard of Richard Dawkins. He is a Darwinist. He really believes that you can explain everything in the material universe by reference to genes and biology and evolution, everything in the organic world. He is now coming out and saying that he would rather live in a Christian society than in, for example, an Islamic society. He still thinks Christianity is nonsense, but he would rather live in a society with Christian values than one without. Now, you may think this is a little bit hypocritical, a little bit inconsistent. It is inconsistent. And I just hope Dawkins keeps going in the direction he apparently is going in. But he's a very stubborn man. But only 5-6 years ago, he would never have said what he just said a few weeks ago. He said it in conversation with another very important intellectual, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Do you know her? Ayaan Hirsi Ali, a Somali woman, came to the Netherlands and made a career for herself in Dutch politics. She then had to leave because she began offending hardline Muslims in the Netherlands. And the Dutch government refused to give her protection, claiming it was too expensive and whatnot. So she moved to America, where she now lives, and she came out last fall at a conference in London and openly declared that she is now Christian. I mean, she had 3 stages. Raised Muslim, very piously. Stage 2, why I am no longer Muslim. She wrote articles with that title. And now the 3rd stage, why I am now a Christian. And so she and Richard Dawkins were debating this, and Dawkins wound up by saying 2 things to her. He said, A, I can see that you are sincerely Christian, and B, Christianity is nonsense. Okay. So what I think I'm saying here is that when I wrote that book over 25 years ago, we were in a very, very different world. Things looked more or less sane, predictable, orderly. The Cold War was over, the Soviet Union was dissolved, liberal democracy appeared to be okay. Yeah, I can hear it better now. Maybe too loud. Okay. Yes, I mean, the world seemed to be set on a track with a destination called universal, liberal, Western-style democracy. Well, that train clearly got derailed. So we're living in a very interesting time now because it forces those of us who think about these things to come clean. What do we really believe? What do we stand for? What do we want? What can we hope for? And so while in many ways the world is a much more threatening and darker place than it was 25, 30 years ago, it's also a place of opportunity. I'll just close with that and remind you that the word for opportunity in Greek is crisis, krisis. And of course that can go two ways. If you're in a crisis, you can either wind up destroyed or you can wind up stronger. And of course we all hope and pray it'll be the second for the whole civilization and for those here tonight. But there we are. We are living in very interesting times, and I'm sort of myself, I'm grateful that I'm here to experience them. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Vishal, we've heard that Westerners don't really think that we have religious roots here in the West. But seen from an Indian perspective, I believe you have very much a different understanding about that question. Could you comment?
Yes, we admire Denmark and Sweden and Finland and Norway as happiest places to live in when it's not snowing. Your freedom, your prosperity, your lack of corruption is very impressive. The equality of all human beings and opportunity, your tolerance. These are wonderful things. I don't know enough about Scandinavian history, Nordic history. A lot of my impressions of Denmark are shaped by a BBC Netflix television series called The Last Kingdom. In that series, which is 9th-10th century, where the Vikings are invading and winning kingdom after kingdom in Scotland and England, the Vikings, Danish, have come across as terrorists. So this does interest me, that how a people who were so dreaded, of course they were brilliant shipbuilders, navigators, warriors, brave, courageous, but people who were terrorizing the world, how did they become so peaceful and just and honest and trustworthy? This is the area that I'm studying because we fought corruption, where the district magistrate, superintendent of police, politicians, they would like to kill me, they attempted to kill me because I was serving the poor. So the superintendent of police said to me that I have a thick file on you. I know everything you're doing in my villages, in every village, and I highly respect you because no one has done for the poor in this district what you're doing. But you cancel that prayer meeting on Wednesday, otherwise I will personally kill you. I will not arrest you and produce you before a magistrate. I will take you from your home to the jungle, shoot you, throw your body, hyenas will eat you. Will you cancel that non-sectarian prayer meeting for the victims of hailstorm? So I said to him that, sir, I'll have to go home and ask my wife if she is willing to be a widow, then I can answer your question. So he let me go. He thought that my wife would not want to be a widow. But in the end, they didn't kill me. They threw me in jail because the press was supporting me and my work. So in the prison, I had to start thinking that here is a highly educated superintendent of police, the district magistrate, who have taken oath of office to uphold the Constitution of India, which guarantees my fundamental right to life, the freedom to pray, freedom to organize a prayer meeting. And they actually don't believe that I have an inalienable right to life. And obviously, we received a constitution which was inspired by Britain and North America, USA, but our educated officers, magistrates, they don't actually believe this. So how was modern India built? I wrote several books on that, and how was, when I discovered that the Bible was the force that built modern India, then I began to explore what else has this book done, and that's how these books were written. And I'm very grateful to the translators that now these books are available in different languages in Nordic nations. But to answer your question directly, how do I see whether religion is at the root of a civilization? Now, I believe that during the last 300-400 years, the reason you have such creative people, trustworthy people, is because the soul of Denmark was shaped by Luther's catechism. Every child had to memorize catechism until a few years ago, memorize the Lord's Prayer, memorize 10 commandments. And commandments such as, you shall not kill. That gives me the right to life. Because God has given me the right to life, the state cannot take it away. Politicians cannot take it. Criminals can take it away, but the government exists to protect my right to life. The command, you shall not steal, gives me my right to property. That the property that I inherit, the property that I create, the wealth that I create is mine, and even the state cannot take it away. Collectivization of agriculture, etc., that the state can just decide to take away what is mine is wrong, because God has commanded the kings that they shall not steal. You shall not covet meant that you will create. The reason why Nordic countries became so creative is because every child memorized the command, you shall not covet. That means, does God want me to be poor? No. He called Abraham because he wants to give him a land flowing with milk and honey. And Jesus said he came to give abundant life. But that doesn't mean that I should covet. It means that I should create, because I'm made in the image of the Creator. So there was short catechism which every child memorized in Denmark, but there was large catechism that Luther wrote, which was a teacher's manual, because the first teachers were pastors. They were teaching the village kids, and a kid can memorize at the age of 3 that you shall not steal, you shall not covet. But as he grows, what do these commands mean? So in the large catechism, Luther says that if you hire a housemaid to look after your cow, look after your garden, look after your children, and few weeks after she is hired working for you, your children are sick, your cow is giving less milk, and your garden is producing less, that housemaid is a thief, because she's taking money to do something which she's not doing. Your roof is leaking, you hire a plumber, roofer, and you pay him, he takes the money, he fixes the roof, it begins to snow, it begins to rain, 3-4 days later it's leaking again. That roofer is a thief, he is stealing, because you shall not steal means that the money that you have taken to fix the roof, you will actually fix it. So Luther goes on to say that a pastor who does not buy books, and we do have books for sale today, a pastor who does not buy a book is a thief. He's being paid to feed the sheep, but he's not cooking food. When he buys a book, wonderful books like this, which I've read very carefully, and he digests it, he is actually cooking the food to teach, to feed the sheep, feed the lamb. So this created the soul, which explains why Nordic nations are so productive, so creative, so trustworthy, that you do not covet property that belongs to someone else, but you create your own wealth. So yes, my answer to your question is that religion is at the root of Western civilization, particularly Nordic nations, even if your scholars in universities don't believe that.
Thank you, Vishal. Well, that leads me to the second question I want to hear, especially David talking about that. Since we are here in Denmark, in the history of any nation, there are always crucial times, crucial turning points. And here in Denmark, the year 1536 is probably one of them. What happened during that year? That's when the king of Denmark, the new king of Denmark, Christian III, it's very easy in Denmark, it's either Christian or Frederick for 500 years. It's been always like that, but this, the third Christian, asked that Johannes Bugenhagen should come to Copenhagen and reform the church. So he wanted Denmark to become a Lutheran nation. Now this is 6 years after the adoption of the Augsburg Confession, when the German princes adopted the Reformation. It's even nearly 10 years after the time when Gustav Vasa adopted the Reformation in Sweden. And now we have the King of Denmark that wants to take the step as well. And so Johannes Bugenhagen came, he went to preach not so far from here, the Church of Our Lady, next to the University of Copenhagen. And the two main steps that he took was to reform the church, replace the old with the new, that is placing Lutherans at the head of the dioceses of the country. And the second step that he took during the few years he was here in Copenhagen was to reform the university. Because he wanted to make sure that at least the pastors here, and that comes back to what Vishal you were talking about, the pastors should be trained in the Word of God so that the people could be fed properly with the food that comes from the Word of God. So that was a turning point. But I would like to hear from you, David, in particular, because you are Danish. How do you see this turning point shaping then the next nearly 500 years? We still have 10 years to wait. But could you comment a little bit more about that, this particular impact of the Reformation in Denmark?
Okay, this is a time for a little, personal confession. I was wondering if I should say this, but I think it has to be said. I'm not Lutheran, I'm Catholic. So my view of 1536 is not that of Johannes Bugenhagen. Having said that, I have always, as a historian, recognized the momentous step. Because let's not forget, I admit this completely, the Church of Rome was not in a good condition in 1536 or 1500. And one of the reasons was that the teaching, the Word of God, was not given pride of place. To give one example, the Catholic bishops of Denmark, who were supposed to be the guardians of their flocks, right? Not one of them had any theological training. They were all lawyers. So when the Danish reformers, before Bugenhagen, the Danish reformers began preaching in the Danish towns, men like Hans Tauelsen, Jens Jørgen Sadolin, they met very little qualified opposition because, like I said, the bishops were lawyers, and some of the priests were good priests, no question, but most of them had very little education. They could not afford to buy books. Books were very expensive. They were becoming cheaper, but they were still very expensive. And so it was pretty easy for them to wipe the floor with what they called the old believers, the gammeltroende. So what happened was great. I applaud it. As a Catholic, I have to say, I would much rather be in Denmark in 1537 than in 1535. Because the whole church, including the Catholic part, was undergoing a tremendous transformation into something much more, I don't like the word modern, but maybe the word is faithful. So there's no question that that is a very, very momentous date. I will just have to add one thing as an outsider to Lutheranism. When the king, and by the way, that king had begun favoring the reformers many years earlier. He was the Duke of Schleswig, and as such, he was promoting reformers into parishes as early as 1522. So he was well prepared. Yes, he gets Copenhagen in. He gets the Danish reformers in. They put the bishops down and they appoint, not new bishops, they wouldn't use that word. They called them superintendents. And of course the hierarchy was abolished. There were no longer, ordination is no longer a sacrament and all that stuff. The one thing that I would say as an outside observer to all this is, okay, fine. But who is now the head priest? Who is now the head of the church? It clearly isn't the Pope. It's not a bishop. It's the king. Just like in England with Henry VIII and later Elizabeth Tudor. The king is now, as it were, God's vicar on earth. I am not completely sure that was that great a deal to get the king, who is not ordained minister, who is not theologically, well, some of them were. Henry VIII was very well trained, but look what he did to his wives. To me, that's always been a very ambivalent date. I should add, I was not raised with Luther's catechism. I was raised a-religiously in Denmark. And I was not baptized as a child. I did not learn the Our Father. I did not learn the catechism. The commandments kind of, because when I was a kid, the school, the public tax-supported school, and this is where Vishal is completely right, inculcated these things. So we were taught what we call Bible history. We taught Adam and Eve, Tower of Babel, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the patriarchs, Moses, all of that stuff. I know, not because I was taught it at home, but because the school taught it. It was like you had to know this stuff, right? Jezebel and Ahab. Oh, you can tell your stories. And that, of course, is a fruit of the Reformation. The fact that the school system, up until the day before yesterday, was charged with transmitting a certain body of scriptural knowledge. But of course you can't do that now, because when you have so many non-Christians, I don't know what the figure is lately, but I was reading recently that when I was a kid, over 90% of Danish children were baptized. I was a very odd one out. But now it's down 80% and kind of dropping, not just because we have a lot of Muslims, but because a number of modern parents don't feel it's very important. I still think, I would agree with Vishal, there is an enormous underlying strength still there, but we have to watch it because it's being nibbled away at. And of course, coming back to the question, how important is 1536? I think it's still overwhelmingly important. But we have to pay attention to it, and I think that goes for everybody, not just Lutherans, but people like myself, that we really need to understand why is this important, and how do we retain the memory of it and the vigor of it for the future.
Yes, Vishal, you would like probably to comment on the impact of education. You already said some words about that.
Yes.
Do you want to respond to?
Yes. So first of all, I agree that Luther created several problems. In this book particularly, when I was writing it in 2017, 500th anniversary of the Reformation, I became very sensitive to the tremendous contribution of the Roman Catholic Church to Europe and to the world. Luther was a Roman Catholic monk, an Augustinian monk. What the Reformation did was take the best of the Roman Catholic tradition and make it available to everyone, to universalize it. One of that was education. So the Roman Catholic Church built universities 450 years before Martin Luther. He was a professor in a Roman Catholic university in Wittenberg. But at that time, university was an institution of the church. Every university was chartered by either the Pope or by the bishop as his Pope's authority. So a university was an institution of the church, for the church, by the church. Luther universalized education on the strength of the New Testament doctrine of priesthood and kingship of all believers. The New Testament taught that while in the Old Testament, in order to be a priest, you had to be born into Levite tribe, in Christ, everyone is a priest because you are a prodigal son who has returned to the Father to serve the Father. You had rebelled against your father, now you are serving him, and you are managing his state, his kingdom. So if you cannot do God's will on earth if you don't know God, you have to know his word, and that's why the Bible should not be in Latin, it should be in German or Swedish or Finnish. That argument that everyone is to be a priest and king, you are a sinner who has returned, a rebel who has returned to his father. So that was the good part of it, but in the process it's true that Luther not only gave made the prince the head of the church, he also made the prince the head of the university. The university, which used to be an institution of the church, now became an institution of the state because the prince had to charter. And that's the problem which now secularized West is facing, of state taking over the ministry of education. So Henry VIII, when he became head of the church, that he's the head of the church, defender of the faith, Luther objected precisely because of his 6 wives, one after the other. Luther objected to it, but Luther himself is the one who created that problem, that prince is the head of the church. So Henry VIII took Luther's advice and promoted. So the whole of the Western civilization in Europe as well as in North America has had this problem of the authority for education and the authority over the church. Where does this come from? To whom does it belong? And the issue is not resolved. In fact, in America, the issue has become a lot more problematic. The domain of marriage, the Roman Catholic Church had made marriage a sacrament, that before a young man and a woman begin to sleep together, they dedicate their relationship, their bodies to God, come before the altar, kneel down, and then it's holy matrimony. Sexuality becomes sacred. But in saying that marriage is not a sacrament, Luther actually began secularization of marriage, and so state has taken over marriage, and state does not even know what is male and what is female, and it cannot know what is love and what is marriage, what is family. So yes, so when I'm saying that for 300-400 years, every child memorizing the Lord's Prayer and the 10 Commandments and the Apostles' Creed, the soul of Denmark was being shaped by religious ideas. I don't mean that all of it was rosy and good. The problems that you are now facing, which we will talk in the next session, are in fact many of the problems created by the Reformation.
Yes, and how I would love to include Calvin in the mix now, but that's not going to be, I can't. I would love to, but I have to discipline myself. Yes, in fact, we need to fast forward a little bit in time. The whole of Europe today is largely secularized. Something happened in history somewhere along the road. And in fact, I would like to focus a little bit more on the 19th century. That's the time when a new movement of philosophers began to rise, in particular in Germany. You, David, you write a lot about that in your book. We have names that have become household names for us, like Immanuel Kant or Hegel, obviously, Schopenhauer, and many others. But there's one name in particular that both of you write about, and you attack him from 2 different angles, and that's obviously Nietzsche, who is known as the father of nihilism. And the first question I would like to ask is again to you, David. So I don't want to look at his impact and how he's still influential today. First of all, I want to know, So can you describe a little bit the framework that he brought, and why was he so successful in penetrating in our societies back then, and obviously all the way to the 20th?
Well, that's a very good question. It is kind of a riddle, because he was a professor of classical philology, Greek and Latin, in Switzerland, and destined for a life of scholarship. But he was not the only one. You mentioned several others, Schopenhauer and so on. He realized quite early on in his career as a student, I think, that there was something in his view terribly wrong with the way universities were set up to function and with the way society was set up to function. And he connected this with what he considered to be the overwhelmingly, I should withdraw that, largely negative role of Christianity. Now, he was from Saxony, which was a very Lutheran state, but of course what he said was pretty much valid all over Europe. But you see, he's often held up as being this great sarcastic destroyer of Christianity. You know, that there is no God, there is no truth, God is dead, we can do whatever we want. The future model human being is this being without morality. What I realize now more than I think when I wrote what I wrote there is that what he was really saying is, look, people, this is happening. The faith is crumbling. But that's not a good thing. Because when the faith crumbles, as he saw it happening, and he somehow felt he could not weigh in on that. That he was saying, well, you're losing your entire civilization. That may be inevitable. He thought it was pretty inevitable. So he was really trying to look beyond the immediate social and theological and philosophical horizon in which he found himself, and he was very perceptive in that. However, now that we're sitting here in Denmark, in Copenhagen, I have to mention another thinker, Søren Kierkegaard, who was somewhat older than Nietzsche, but in my opinion, a much more profound thinker. And Kierkegaard, basically, you could talk for hours about him, but as I understand him, his basic point was to make people realize that Christianity is A, personal, and B, vital. And he, just like Nietzsche in some ways, he rebelled against the conventional society of his day. You go to church on Sunday, you listen to a sermon, you feel uplifted, you feel like a good person. Ein Gutmensch, they say in Germany. You go home and you have your nice bourgeois Sunday dinner, and then your work week starts. Next Sunday you do the same thing, and you feel better and better about yourself because the bishop, the priest, keeps telling you that you're a good person. And Kierkegaard, he couldn't stand it. He thought it was hypocritical. And it was, in fact, and here again he's close to Nietzsche, this kind of outward Christianity was actually destroying Christianity, because look what happened in the next generation. I'm jumping ahead a little bit here. Next generation, after Kierkegaard, he died in 1855, Nietzsche stopped writing in 1889. Already by that time, by the late 19th century, you were starting to get the generation of the great despisers, the real haters of Christianity, who were just saying, well, look, Kierkegaard was right, Nietzsche was right, it's all a sham, it's all a joke. There's nothing to believe in except what we ourselves believe in. And at the same time, you had other currents coming forward. You had Darwinism, evolutionary thinking. What comes later is better because it has survived the struggle for existence. Therefore, later is better, newer is better, because by having survived, it's proved in itself. And therefore, might makes right, on all of that kind of philosophy that grabbed large parts of the Western world in the years up to World War I, when it all came crashing horribly down. Coming back to Nietzsche here, I think what I would say now is that he saw this happening and saw that it was probably not something you could do anything about, but he was going to try to warn people. And the generation before him, Kierkegaard, said the same thing. If your faith is not, if you're not a person vis-a-vis God, if you're just a member of a mass, a congregation, you go through the motions, you go to church, you obey the commandments, more or less. But Kierkegaard kept saying, no, people, no. This is a personal encounter. I mean, God is a person. You're a person. And if you don't understand that, you may as well just go on living your bourgeois lives. I'll close with one thing. Kierkegaard once wrote, When the world ends, it'll happen like this. It'll be like people, use a parable, it'll be like people sitting in a theater, and out comes the clown and says, the world is ending. Everybody laughs. Ha, 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 funny, funny, funny. And the clown says, no, I'm serious. The world is ending. Ha, 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 funny man, funny man. And Kierkegaard comments, that's how the world will end. People will think it's a joke. They won't even notice it.
Wow. Well, Vishal, now this is up to you. In your book, I discovered something about him, and that's very important for us to understand also, as we will jump into our contemporary times, that Nietzsche was strongly influenced by Buddhism, by Eastern religions. So you write about that. Can you comment on that?
Sure. So actually the first Western European philosopher who encountered Buddhism was David Hume. Not many people know about it,
no.
But he went from Scotland to a monastery, a Roman Catholic monastery in France. There a monk had returned from the Himalayas where he was trying to evangelize, but also learn Buddhism, and so this monk wrote Christian tracts for those people, but wrote about Buddhism for the Roman Catholic Church, brought his manuscript back to the monastery. Abbot didn't permit him to publish that first book, what would have been the first book on Buddhism in the West. So when David Hume came to that monastery, the monk wasn't there, but another monk who had actually read that manuscript and understood Buddhism began to talk about it to David Hume. And that is what enabled David Hume to critique René Descartes' rationalism, that logic and reason cannot know truth. This was a fundamental assumption of the Buddha and the whole Upanishadic era in Indian philosophy when Buddha was born, that human logic, human mind cannot know the truth. But Hume believed that empirical observation, what we see with our eyes or hear with our ears, touch, etc., senses can know the truth, which was demolished by Immanuel Kant in Germany, that no, our brain filters all the information that comes. We don't really see the world as it is. We see this as solid, but it is not solid because every atom has subatomic particle have tremendous space. So our mind sees things one way. So we know what is phenomena, but we don't know reality as it is in itself, the noumena. So in 1781, 1788, Immanuel Kant wrote Critique of Pure Reason, Critique of Practical Reason, which although Kant remained an optimist that human beings can know the truth, he himself provided the what is essentially a Buddhist pessimism that human beings cannot know the truth. Neither human logic nor human sensory experience can know the truth. So what Nietzsche is doing, and Schopenhauer understands it even better before Nietzsche, what they are saying is actually taking modernism, the Enlightenment, confidence in human ability to know the truth without divine revelation, that without God's revelation, we can know the truth. That comes to an end with Schopenhauer and Nietzsche. So when Nietzsche says we have killed God, God is dead, he means truth is dead, soul is dead, spirit realm is dead. If truth is dead, then truth can have no authority. God is dead means truth can have no authority in culture. Then what has authority? This is what creates the horrors of the 20th century. A great historian, Paul Johnson, British historian, he points out that because of what ends with Nietzsche, the hope that human mind will be able to know the truth, Karl Marx comes when Marx says that philosophers have tried to understand the world, our job is to change it. What he's saying is that philosophers have failed, we cannot know the truth, so let's change the world, not try and know the world. And Marx thinks that everything is determined not by ideas, not by beliefs, but by economics, economic determinism. We are matters, material, because spiritual realm doesn't exist. Material reality determines our ideas, our faiths, our values, etc. Freud later on says, no, we are animals, our instincts, lust, sex, they drive us. So sexual instinct is a lot more powerful than economic instinct, for example. But Nietzsche perceives that if truth is dead, then it is our will to power, which is what creates fascism, Nazism, and horrors of the 20th century, because he was a lot more perceptive. And what that is doing is, what Nietzsche is doing is, taking us back to the encounter between Jesus and Pilate. Are you a king? Jesus says, I came to bear witness to the truth. Whoever is on the side of truth listens to me. Pilate says, what is truth? What Pilate is saying is, after Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, truth died in Greek. Greek rationalism died. And it was Buddhism which had actually destroyed Aristotelian rationalism. One of Aristotle's disciples was Pyrrho of Elea, who went to India with Alexander the Great and stayed in India for 18 months, studied Buddhism. He was already a skeptic. He didn't quite agree with Aristotle that logic can know the truth. When he returned, he destroyed Greek rationalism. So Europe had given up faith 300 years before Christ that human mind can know the truth. If Europe began to trust human mind again, it was because of the Bible and because of St. Augustine, who said that mind is God's greatest gift to human beings. So the Western mind was being cultivated in monasteries, which grew into the universities, because the Bible had said that we are made in God's image, and Augustine said that God's image in us is not in our hands and our feet, but in our minds. So to be godly means to cultivate the mind. But now, if the human mind cannot know the truth, which is what has happened to the Enlightenment with Nietzsche, then we're back to where Pilate and Jesus encounter is. Pilate he's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Israel, and he says, this man is innocent. There is no basis for a charge against this man. But the mob shouts, crucify him, crucify him. So he starts trying Jesus again. He reopens the case, and Jesus stops talking to him. And Pilate says, why wouldn't you talk to me? Don't you realize that I have the power to crucify you or to set you free? Wait a minute. You are the Chief Justice. You've just given a public verdict that this man is innocent. If he is innocent, do you have the power to crucify him? Or is the power given to you to defend him from the mob that wants to lynch him, that wants to kill him? What Pilate is saying is, since truth is dead, I don't know the truth, nobody knows the truth, none of the Greek philosophers know the truth. If truth is dead, then what matters is power. This is what Nietzsche is saying, and that is what is now happening to the Western university. That universities are not allowed to talk truth, to discuss truth, to debate truth. I was in 2 debates in 2 different universities in Finland last week. Both the times I was told by the organizers that I'm not allowed to say a word about gender, because the university is now a totalitarian system where there is no freedom to discuss the most important issues which are bothering the society. So, because what matters is the mob, which will threaten the establishment of the university. So you are already losing your freedom, including in the universities where you're supposed to have freedom of thought. In the press, in the parliament, you are no longer free. So, and this is for the next segment, that you have been amongst the freest of the nations, but you're losing your freedom including in your parliaments and universities?
All right, let's get into part two of our discussion. So we're now tackling the present situation. We want to find out a little bit, how is Denmark doing today? And of course, you're more the insider, David, so we'll start with you. When I look a little bit at the things we said in the first part, then we looked at roots, Christian roots that were there, that were influencing the university, and were building morals and ethics here that truly were different to the Indian roots and the Indian ethics, so it's very visible. And then we heard, though, that the Bible isn't being taught anymore, although you said 80% of the people still call themselves Christians here in Denmark, but that sounds a lot like a minority now takes a form of a very influential and meaningful tyranny almost. We said that truth has been replaced through the very good German and Danish philosophers. So more power is now the rule rather than truth. So how has that shaped today's society? What can you observe today? How can you analyze today's Danish society with the things that we said from a historic perspective? David.
I hope this works here. Well, going back to what I said earlier, I think that we are in a situation now where as it were, the rot has set into the woodwork of the structure of civilization for a long, long time. And in the time of Nietzsche, it began to accelerate. And then Vishal mentioned the great catastrophes of the 20th century due in large part to the denial of truth. I mean, truth became either a joke in the eyes of so-called serious philosophers, or it became the subject of language games. If you go back and study the history of philosophy, in English-speaking countries at least, you will find that for a large part of the 20th century, many philosophers spent all their time arguing about the meaning of words. What is a statement? What makes a statement true? And some of this was not entirely wasted, but they were completely unwilling to get at the question, actually, what is truth? Because that begins to sound like religion and Christianity, and that is like not possible in the university. But you see, for quite a long time, in this country and other countries in the West, things moved along more or less normally, because university, well, we all know that that's full of crazy people, but the bulk of society operated on its own logic, and it was a pretty sound logic. If you look at the different countries of the West, you will find that the movement from saying, well, religion is... No, I'll back up a bit here. I think you have three stages of this process that we're now in the middle of. In stage one, Christianity is still pretty much standard. Everyone pays respect to it. Being a Christian is a good thing in society. If you go to church, if you obey the rules, you are admired. That was the case in most of the Western countries until probably, depending on what you're talking about, middle of the 20th century. Then you have what I call, I didn't make this up, it's a sociological theorem by somebody else. But anyway, the second stage is what this author of this theory calls the zombie stage. Now, in the zombie stage, you still have Christians, and you still have rituals, and you still have certain things like, for example, in this country, the monarch has to belong to the Lutheran Church. The only person in the kingdom who does not have freedom of religion is the king. Kind of like in England. Very, very like in England. But being a Christian is not an active disadvantage. Okay? But in stage 3, which is stage 0, which is where we are now, increasingly, not just in universities and in the media houses and in public debate, increasingly being a Christian is now a handicap. Such a person is, we all know, right, prejudiced, narrow-minded, bigoted, unable to see both sides of the question, probably believes that men can't become women, other weird things like that. And as you well know, as Vishal alluded to earlier, if you uphold such opinions, you cannot work in the university, you cannot work in the media, you cannot teach children, unless, of course, you teach them in a Christian school. That's a different thing. Maybe we'll get to that option later. So I think we are actually at what I call stage 0. Stage zero, where being a Christian is increasingly a problem in the wider society. What that then impels us to do is, I think, for the last part of the debate, but I just wanted to say here that we are increasingly in the West, and also, I'm afraid to say in the United States, at stage zero. And of course, America was always supposed to be the great exception to this rule. When I was growing up and studying sociology and history, I was being told, yeah, well, secularization, the undermining of Christianity as an official social structure, has gone ahead in Europe, but look at America. Americans still go to church, often more than once a week. Most people call themselves Christian, etc., etc. And that was true until about 10 years ago. Since then, it has gone much faster than even I, in my darkest moments, could have foreseen. I can't offhand remember the figures, but they are terrifying. If you look at the number of people who say religion is very important in their lives, that number has dropped from 70% 20 years ago to less than half now in the United States. So America is not the exception. And I say this as a descendant of Anglican Episcopal ministers in New York City. So we are at stage zero, and that puts a whole new complexion on how we should think about society and how we should think about what is to be done than it would have done even just not very many years ago. So we are in uncharted waters. Thank you.
If I may add then one more question to that. I mean, that's a fairly straight statement. We're at place zero, stage zero. Is the political system ready for that challenge? Or do you think they haven't noticed that yet?
I think some have. I mean, we're talking about generalities here. There are always exceptions. I mean, I often upset my wife because I despise politicians and don't make a secret of it. But of course, in every walk of life, be it politics, academia, journalism, there are hard-working professional people. It's just that they have a harder time making themselves heard than they used to. Because the default position, the standard position, used to be, as I said before, used to be that it's okay to be Christians, just don't say it out loud too much. Now, even the suspicion that you might be one is a handicap in bigger and bigger circles. And I think the response has to be, well, okay, so what? If it's a handicap, right, so be it. We shouldn't be afraid to declare ourselves. I'm sorry, what was the last part of the question?
Whether they're prepared for it.
Yes, well, I'm afraid, and here I generalize again, I'm afraid if you look at the political system in most countries, and I think Hungary is a great exception here, Western countries, I won't even begin to talk about Russia here, but please let's not talk about Russia. But with the exception of Hungary and Poland until last fall, Western politicians were all mostly been raised in this kind of generic, liberal, semi-atheists, semi-rationalist, sort of globalistic mindset, where you believe things like man-made global warming, for example, like somebody just reminded me, one of my bêtes noires. They're not prepared, most of them, to take this seriously, which is one of the reasons why, of course, they allow the gradual Islamization of more and more public debate. And Islamization / what's the right word for this? Wokeization. There was a small example just the other day of a young poet in a part of the city who responded to a competition written out by the local authority of this district to write experimental poetry. And so he thought, this is a good idea, I'll do that. So he wrote a poem which was denied to be received because certain women on the board thought it was critical of, well, you can sort of imagine what, but sort of critical of the whole gender theory thing. And so the lesson here is the politicians say increasingly they're tolerant, they're broad-minded, everyone's welcome, but only if they all think the same way. So no, they're not at all prepared for what's happening. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because it means that those people who are prepared may be able to get a hearing.
Okay, that leaves us some good food for thought for the third part of this discussion. But let's stay in the present time. Vishal, you just toured Norway, Sweden, and Finland. You had meetings with many students, with professors, but also with regular people from the street and from families, and one thing that came very clearly through there is this gender confusion. Can you try to deconfuse the Danish people on where's that coming from and why is everybody so confused?
Well, I mentioned yesterday, I guess, that when the President Joe Biden nominated Mrs. Jackson as the for position as justice in the Supreme Court of the U.S. in 2022, she was replacing Ruth Bader, one woman replacing another woman. So during her nomination hearing, she was asked, "What is a woman?" And she said that I'm not a biologist, so I cannot define what a woman is. Now here you have a learned lady who is becoming the chief justice, associate justice in the Supreme Court, and she cannot define what a woman is. Why is it? The answer is very simple, that the only way to define a woman is in contrast to a man. Are men and women different? She's not prepared to say that, because if men and women are different, how can they be equal and one and same? So either they're different or they're same. So what has happened, earlier the Western civilization didn't have this problem, because the metaphysical foundation of the West was that there is the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, three persons, one God, are bound together in love. So this God says, as Genesis 1 says, in the beginning God created heavens and the earth. The Spirit of God was hovering over the water. The Word of God began to create. And this triune God says, let's make man in our image. And he makes man in his image, male and female, for two of them to be one. And when the two become one, they become three. He blessed them. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. So human family is made in God's image. A little reflection of being bound together in love. But if you reject Trinity, which is what the education system has done, because what you've done is rejected revelation, God's self-revelation, then you cannot believe in unity and diversity. Either men and women are different or they are the same. Islam doesn't have that problem. Hinduism doesn't have that problem. A Hindu can define what a woman is because he believes that a soul is incarnated as female because her karma in the previous life were inferior. Previous lives were inferior, so you get a female birth. So if men and women are different, you can define a woman. But if men and women are the same, you cannot define what a woman is unless they are both same and different, which means that they are made in the image of a triune God. So rejecting that foundation of Trinity has created this problem, but that includes the problem of you can no longer define what gender is. And at the back of it is pantheism, which in modern Western philosophy begins with Spinoza, Einstein, Teilhard, Chardin. These are all factors which we haven't yet had the time to explain. But what pantheism or oneism, monism means is that all duality is illusion. Good and evil, true and false, male and female is illusion. As Carl Jung would say, that anima and animus is in everyone. Male and female principle, energy is in everyone, which is Tantra, Hindu Tantra, Buddhist Tantra, that every man has feminine energy in him, which is Shakti or Kundalini. So the worldview of the Western philosophy has shifted from God creating the world outside of himself to the world being God. Everything is God, pantheism. In that, if everything is one, then you cannot have dualism of male and female, except as an illusion. So gender then becomes a spectrum. and someone can be at any point of the spectrum. So what is happening is that while the university is rejecting revelation and Trinity, it is accepting monism or pantheism and tantric view of male and female being in everyone, and that undermines marriage. So marriage is difficult. Two sinners living happily ever after is a difficult challenge. But philosophically it becomes worse, because in Hinduism and Buddhism, when you are seeking enlightenment, first thing you have to do is renounce marriage. Because marriage is an affirmation of my finiteness. When I'm getting married, I'm saying that I'm finite. I'm male, I'm not female, I need my wife to be complete. So I'm affirming my finiteness. But if I'm seeking Hindu moksha, salvation, I'm seeking to become infinite, which I cannot affirm marriage, my finiteness, and become infinite. I have to say, no, male and female is within me, and I have to realize the infinity which is within me. The self is infinite. So this is a tremendous worldview shift, and the university and the intellectual environment which thinks that it is becoming non-religious is in fact accepting a religious worldview which is replacing a Trinitarian view of the universe with a monistic or pantheistic view of the universe. So yes, that's only one of the problems, but it also has many other ramifications, one of which is in Finland. When I was in the university, they said that a particular research was done, sociological research, in which students said that state can change the future, but we cannot change. That I'm significant, that I impact history, that idea of the dignity of man, as Pico della Mirandola put it, that I can shape my destiny. That was the concept of the dignity of man. That is lost, because if I'm part of the cosmos, I can't change the cosmos, I can't change destiny. So optimism was a tremendous contribution of the Bible's view of what a human being is, created in God's image to establish His dominion on this earth. When that foundation is gone, then I'm one of the animals, I'm part of the animal kingdom, and I cannot really shape my own destiny or the future. So this pessimism, a sociological research in Helsinki University showed that this intellectual pessimism is taking hold of the Western mind.
Thank you. David, this of course would then get me to think, what role does the institutional church still play today in Denmark? And depending on your answer, what are the social consequences of their behavior?
Well, the church has become, for most of its spokesmen and spokeswomen, an NGO, a social welfare organization. So has my church, I'm very sorry to say. I mean, these people think that the purpose of Christianity is to make earthly life better. Forget saving souls. That's superstitious. No. We have to go out and help the poor, help the starving, help the Palestinians in Gaza, and so the list is long. So the church is becoming just another one of those do-gooder institutions who always fail to do good. They almost always do worse, make things worse, but that's another economic kind of argument. So, most of them, the Danish bishops and the clergy and of course people who write in religious newspapers and so on, most of them would take that view. Also, of course, in Denmark we have a largely feminized clergy, which is not totally unconnected with this. So yeah, they think that preaching, that the gospel is about telling people to have the right beliefs, about gender, about alleged global warming, about all these things that these kinds of people think it's important to have opinions about. We do have one little island of resistance, and I'm very proud not to be associated with them. I've spoken at their meetings. It's been a while, but there is a little island of resistance in Denmark, and it's a rather small group of clergymen and thinkers, and they meet once a year, and they hold very strictly to Søren Kierkegaard's Christianity, and really take the gospel very seriously. They, of course, are reviled as conservative outsiders and bad people by the church mainstream, but they won't shut up, which is very good. So I, as a Catholic, enjoy greatly going to their meetings. It's always very stimulating, and you come away with the great feeling of, yeah, there are good people here. I estimate that their share of the Danish religious establishment is probably about 10%. We have, I believe it's 11 Lutheran bishops, and there's always one diocese that gets to elect someone from that group, and the rest not. So it's a minority position, but we do have them. So, all hope is not lost by any means. But the majority are just like, UN, EU kind of, functionaries. Yeah.
That's a fairly frustrating and dark picture that you're painting.
Yes.
I can imagine there are still quite a few nations on earth that would love to take a permanent vacation in Denmark and live here. Are there any societal strength left that are still present and maybe born out of the roots that we talked earlier? Any strength?
Yes.
Are there any societal strength still left? We've talked a lot now about the problems, the issues, yes, the negative impacts, but what are today at least some strength that are left over that would describe the society and remain attractive also for the future?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think Vishal has sort of answered it earlier. There's a lot of inertia. I think it was Adam Smith, the economist, who once said, there's a lot of ruin in a nation. You can undermine a nation for a long, long time before it really starts to collapse. And I am I've said this before in other contexts, gratified to see that the strength is there. I think America is collapsing much faster right now than Denmark is. We're not Hungary. We're not governed by patriots. We're governed by anti-patriots. But the common people, and I don't live in the capital, so I get to see common people, are basically not taken in by this. The problem is they have no voice. Why do they have no voice? They have no voice because the way the political system is set up, it elects and promotes people from within itself. In the old days, you could go into politics in this country and you could rise to become a minister from the outside. But today, you usually have to go to the same university, get the same degree in political science, join a party organization, never do an honest day's work in your life, and if you say the right words, you can become a minister. And so that's why the quality of our politicians is so abysmally low, but the quality of the people is, I won't say abysmally high, that would be arrogance, but I think quite superior. So as long as that popular common sense remains dominant, as it is, I think, outside the capital here, we're not in the best shape, but not in the worst shape either.
Vishal, we talked earlier about universities. You said that the university had been taken over by the state, yielded by the Christians. As a consequence, truth had been replaced with tendency of power. Nietzsche called it will to power, and the university have understood that, and business has understood that. But as a consequence, you said that now there's no more freedom. We have lost the freedom. So with the truth, the freedom went. Now we see all the young people out there fighting for freedom of deciding themselves, whether they want to be a boy or a girl. A woman deciding what she wants to do when she's pregnant. Isn't there a contradiction in freedom there of what you said? The freedom is gone, and then the young people are claiming a certain freedom. How can we resolve that contradiction?
Well, the Lord Jesus said that if you remain in my word, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Truth is what is a casualty, as Dr. Gress said earlier, with Wittgenstein, who was a philosopher of language and logic. In the beginning of Bertrand Russell said that Wittgenstein was the most important philosopher of the first half of the 20th century. And he was studying, because with Nietzsche saying truth, God is dead, it was understood that it means truth is dead. So what is truth? Can language, can words, can logic communicate truth? This is what Wittgenstein is exploring. And the first part of his career, he believes that yes, language can know the truth, and human beings can know the truth, and language can communicate the truth. But after World War I, the second phase of his career, he believes that human language has nothing to do with truth, which means the language is a tool that animals develop to manipulate each other. It's a tool of manipulation. Words are tools of manipulation. They can't communicate truth. So if truth goes, then really freedom also goes. But at this point now, we have to return to ground zero. As I mentioned, Pyrrho of Elia, when he returned from India 300 years before Christ, Alexander died in Babylon, but Pyrrho returned and he destroyed Greek rationalism. And out of that came Gnosticism, mysticism, occult. So Greek culture was built on mythology, not on rationalism. And that is what has happened to the West, that once confidence that the human reason can know the truth, human mind can know the truth, human words can communicate the truth. When that disappeared with Nietzsche and his successors, Freud included, then the faith in mythology, in stories, took over. So with Carl Jung, studying world mythology, and particularly his successor, Joseph Campbell, the power of myth. So the Western world no longer believes in philosophy, no longer believes in logic, it believes in stories, in mythology. Correct. But with that has come occult. So seeking spiritistic power. As I was just walking on the street here, a shop of clairvoyance and healing was there, that divination, fortune telling, etc. So the myths, occult, fortune telling, astrology, these things have come. What is the answer? The answer is to return to revelation. So my professors were saying that they can speak, but their creator cannot possibly speak. That didn't make sense to me. They were saying that we can write books, our creator cannot possibly have his point of view written. So I said, well, maybe you write books because you're made in the image of someone who wrote one. Is there a God? Because after studying philosophy, I had come to the conclusion that perhaps the Buddha was right. We are like 5 blind men trying to make sense of an elephant, and we are fighting with each other because we don't know the elephant. How can the blind man know the elephant? If there is a 6th person who is not blind, who speaks and says, you think elephant is like a pillar because you're holding the foot, you move 5 feet up, you can feel what the other person thinks is wall, but is actually the stomach, etc. I begin to do what this person is saying, and I realize that he is different from the rest of us. So, could there be someone who is not blind? And it seemed to me, as a 20-year-old student of philosophy, that the concept of blindness exists because sight exists. If sight didn't exist, we wouldn't talk about blindness. So yes, we are blind, but could there be someone who knows? Has he spoken? That's what led me to study different scriptures. I began with Hindu scriptures, but finally found that the Bible really is God's revelation. That is there a God? Does he know? Has he spoken? Can he communicate? It was this confidence in revelation that God made our minds in his image, just like a mother would teach a child language so that she can communicate to that child, tell the child who her father is, etc. Did God give us the gift of language that he might communicate truth to us? So this led to my search, and this is in fact why the Western civilization, Western monasteries for example, cultivated the mind. In Buddhist monasteries, they were teaching the art of silencing your mind, how to empty your mind through meditation, through mantra, through repetition of a sound. the art of killing your mind was what was being taught in our monasteries. But in European monasteries, when a young boy, 13-year-old, went to a monastery to become a monk, he learned to fast, to pray, to sing, to play music, but he also studied philosophy and logic and language and literature and law. That's why some of the monasteries grew into universities, because in the Middle Ages, particularly in Western Europe, Latin-speaking Europe, it was understood that the human mind is made in God's image, and God has given us the gift of language so He could communicate truth to us. So I think this is time to say that yes, we can know the truth if our mind is made in God's image, for us to seek truth and for us to receive truth.
Okay, and that leads us in a minute then to the third part of hope. But one final concluding question to the second part of the present time. Has the light turned into darkness? Are there any moral roots left in Denmark? It's very provocative, but if you can answer that ideally in one word, but stay within one sentence if it's not one word.
Well, I think I've touched on this, so I'll just say very much so. The challenge is that those roots are not self-aware, because they are taken up, what he's just said, by this belief in pantheism, that there's no logic, there's no revelation. Behind all that, yes, there are roots, yes.
Yes, Western civilization, Denmark is still a beautiful castle. Foundations are gone, and a house without a foundation can stand for a long time. But one day an earthquake will come, flood waters will rise, and the great house will collapse. And that can happen through a war, or through a crash of Wall Street, etc. But at the moment the castle looks beautiful, even though its foundation is gone. But foundation can be rebuilt if we understand it.
Okay, thank you. All right, so now together we have played the Demolition Man, and we want to end the evening on a hopeful level, so I allow now Cedric to play Bob the Builder again with you and bring us into the future.
Thank you very much, yes. So indeed, you've depicted a little bit the present situation in Denmark, which is, I would say, rather transposable to all our Nordic nations. So various degrees, obviously, of secularization, and I would say all across Europe. We've discussed extensively about how the Bible has shaped our nations and how, in which stage we are now, and how the church today, in which shape the church is. But now the question for me to you, in order to finish with a note of hope, would be: can the church still play a vital role in giving a future to the West, to Europe, in particular to Denmark? I will start again with you, David.
Well, depends what you mean by church. If you mean the hierarchy, be it in my church or in the Lutheran churches, I would say don't look for much hope there. I mean, my church is busy expelling the last Orthodox bishops. I could give you a name and chapter and verse, but I won't, because it's not a Catholic seminary. But I mean, the official church is just like the one here, basically a UN sidekick. And the really Orthodox bishops, priests who try to uphold truth are silenced, sidelined, disciplined, and so on. So in that sense, church, not much. But if you define church in a more broad sense as all believers, then it's a whole different picture. Now, I follow the debate on these issues in the U.S. quite closely. I don't get to go there nearly as often as I'd like, but I do read, various people that I trust. And it seems that there's a great deal of ferment taking place in a number of different denominations. And speculation, experimentation. What strikes me is that experimentation, I don't mean just create, I mean, how do we, for example, create schools? And that's the one thing I think everybody can agree on must be done, is to create education, create schools that are not bound to the orthodox, the state ideology of genderism and environmentalism and so forth. So yeah, in that sense, church I won't say is alive and well, but the things that are taking place. Now, I'm not going to spend much time on this because we have to close soon, but there are two ways forward, okay? The one way is to engage actively, to think you can change things out there. I'm not sure that way is open anymore because the society is so much against it. The other option is what a very wise man called Rod Dreher calls the Benedict option. Withdraw from the world. Make your communities strong. Worship together, act together. They could be making schools, making other things, but realize that the world is against you and will be for a long time. So you're cutting yourself off, you're creating little enclaves of sanity in an ocean of more or less, yes, I won't say insanity, but what we have around us. If you take church to mean everybody who believes, then these kinds of options are on the table. Do we think that we can actually change? And again here, you may be able to change communities in a small way. I think we see this happening. America is such a big country, you can do almost anything you want. In Denmark it's much more difficult because it's a small country and any strange community would be immediately recognized as being strange and would probably have a lot of trouble getting financing and so forth and so on. But then there are other ways of doing this. So I would say if church is taken in the broad sense, then there are possibilities, and I would think education is probably the main area of interest here, that could be pursued in a positive direction.
So that in fact it reminds me of, in my previous organization, we had organized an event with Professor Tomáš Halík, former counselor of Václav Havel in Czech Republic, who had said, actually, for the future, I would like to propose to you that we return to monasticism. Obviously, he's a Roman Catholic priest, but he said, don't worry, I'm not talking about old monasticism, but really recreating communities of fellowship and learning.
Yes.
So is that what?
That's exactly what I'm talking about, yes. I mean, this is very non-denominational. I mean, Rod Dreher, interesting man, began life as a Methodist, became Catholic, and then left the church because of the child abuse scandals, and is now Orthodox. Lives, as I said, in Budapest, and is very fond of Hungary. Check him out on the net. You'll be amazed. Yeah, that's exactly what he advocates. It's not sectarian, but it is the idea of communities that stick together because of a common goal and a common core and a common, yes, method of working together, a way of living. Yes.
Vishal, you want to comment?
Yes, what we hope to get started in the next few months is a new encyclopedia where an international forum of professors and scholars would begin to research and create content using artificial intelligence, etc., some of the technology which didn't exist when Wikipedia was created. So Christians globally and other honest researchers, scholars globally who are unafraid to speak the truth, they will help create this curriculum. Out of the encyclopedia, we want to create curriculum at all levels. So in 9th grade chemistry is different than 11th grade chemistry, and in Denmark it's different than in Kenya. But the teachers begin to use the material that is being openly discussed in this new encyclopedia to create curricula for all level, and this should be available online. So we had a meeting today where we discussed it. So this will be on a digital platform from kindergarten to 12th grade. The entire curriculum will be given away for free so that the poorest child can have as good a curriculum as a rich, wealthy child. And this would be using AI, etc., which should be translated into as many languages as possible. So every child, whether he is studying at home or in a little mud hut or in a fancy school, has the best curriculum which can keep on being revised, and you don't have to have a teacher. But we will be training teachers. So there will be a diploma, bachelor's or master's level curriculum where teachers are being trained and truth is being communicated. So in a remote jungle in Congo, where girls cannot go to the next village where there is a middle school, they can meet in the church or in a room in their own village and have this best curriculum coming to them. So every church globally can become a micro school or a micro university where maybe only 20 students are there in the church 5 days a week, but 20,000 professors are coming to the church online. And what the church has is an academic pastor, which is like a homeschooling mother, making sure that the students are learning and where what is the content coming in books or videos or internet is not understood, they can organize webinars, seminars, or one-on-one discussion with an expert who will take the time to teach. So this is what we call the third education revolution, because from my point of view, in Europe, the first education revolution began with Charlemagne and Carolingian Renaissance. The second education revolution built upon the Roman Catholic universities when Luther said that education should be universal, because every child who has rebelled against God has now come back to serve his father as priest and manage his father's kingdom as a royal priest. So every child must be educated. But in 1832, after Napoleon and French Enlightenment, etc., this is when the church in Europe handed over the ministry of education to the state. In America, it started with Horace Mann in 1848 and completed the process of secularization of education with Dewey after World War I, before and after World War I in Chicago. So the church in Europe and in North America handed over the responsibility and ministry of education to the state. Third education revolution is empowering the global church to take this ministry of discipling nations, educating nations, so that education is re-grounded in truth, veritas, and virtue, character, that you are shaping the character of a child, the character which has created nations such as Denmark, where there is very little corruption. That character has to be reshaped globally. So yes, third education revolution has already begun, and Truth and Transformation is in fact created this little group in Nordic countries to facilitate, empower the church to take the ministry of education back from the state.
Wow, thank you very much. So if I can summarize what you both said, I will now fusion the two of you and say that David Mangalwadi said tonight that basically what we need to do is to rebuild these small communities of fellowship and learning. But now what you're saying also is that these communities have to stick together and begin to somehow share knowledge, because with the internet, with these new technologies that we have, indeed a professor in Denmark can teach someone in Brazil or in Bangladesh, in wherever in the world. So that would be basically the conclusion of what you two are suggesting tonight. And that is in fact the reason why Truth and Transformation Nordic, the organization, one of the two organizations that is behind this event, was created. Our goal was really to begin to gather people, like-minded people who understand the situation, understand the issues that, in particular in the Nordic nations, we are facing. And so we've begun to gather people from the Nordic nations, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. We were still looking for Icelandic people and people from the Faroe Islands, Lord willing, in due time, to begin to think in those terms, to begin to walk the long path. Now we're praying that we see something in our lifetime to come out. We might not see it in our lifetime. We have to remember Martin Luther had this vision of universal education, but for example, in the Nordic nations, it came it became a reality only 150 years after the beginning of the Reformation. So it's a long-term process. But so this is why Truth and Transformation Nordic exists. If you feel attracted to such a vision as presented by Vishal, and also the proposal that David has brought to the table tonight, please come and talk to us, and would be very happy to see you coming in this team that is being built here across the Nordic nations. And I would like to thank you again, Vishal and David, for having taken time with us. Let us give an applause to them.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much also from my side. For those online, thank you for listening and watching. I hope you have enjoyed this as well. For the audience here in this wonderful church, also thank you for coming.